All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Yard Prep, your Miami Dolphins pregame show here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm your host, David Fernandez. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Michael Quirk. You can see him sort of right down there. And we have the pleasure with us. We got the big boss man, Ethan Skolnick. He's in the house. We've also got Louis Sung, who is your host of the Pulse of Fins Nation, as well as Hussam Patel, who runs the scouting combine here on the network. We're going to get to our thoughts on what we're going to see here with the Dolphins' final preseason game, talk a little bit about some of the roster battles that we think are going to unfold, and just get you ready for some Dolphins football. But before we get there, want to tell you about today's sponsor. We are brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest, fastest, and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Members play the over-under on between anywhere from 2 to 5 players of their choice. You can pick from a wide variety of sports and stat types, and even mix and match different sports in one entry. The more picks you correctly predict, the more money you win. Payouts on PrizePicks can be as high as 10 to 15 times your stake. If you head over to prizepicks.com, make sure you're using the promo code 5, that's FIVE, to get a deposit match up to $100. Again, that's FIVE. Stay tuned a little later in the show. We've got some PrizePicks player spotlights for you to help you out for tonight's ball game. But guys, we've got the preseason finale on tap. The Dolphins are facing the Philadelphia Eagles. This was famously the Super Bowl matchup from Ace Ventura, if you remember. These two teams, they were scheduled for joint practices this week. They only committed one of them, or completed one of them, rather. That stomach bug sort of going around kind of canceled things. But we've got some major stuff on tap, right? Because the cut down day is right around the corner. Ethan, I'll go to you first. What are you hoping to see here tonight from the Miami Dolphins?
Well, the first most important thing is you don't want anybody who might have made the 53 getting hurt. I mean, that's kind of where this starts. I mean, we've seen this before with Dolphin, final preseason games. The Jake Long experience, I think, sticks out here. So, I think you want to avoid that more than anything else, which obviously is only so much you can do. But I think there's limitations to how much you can play certain guys. But I also think, we're looking at a couple of positions of concern right now, I think, depth-wise. I think cornerback and offensive line, particularly offensive tackle, are places that I think Dolphin fans have some reason to be worried. Obviously Miami has a plethora of players at other positions. There's depth at the running back position. There's depth at the wide receiver position. There seems to be some depth on the defensive line. But I just those two spots are concerning. I would assume that Greer and McDaniel have their eyes on players from other teams. I know that CK had put out there the possibility of maybe a tackle or an offensive lineman getting cut from San Francisco that they're familiar with. So I think we would look at that. And we always know that kind of those last 6-7 players on the roster tend to get shuffled. But you don't want to lose any core guys tonight. We've seen enough from Tua as it is, in my view, during this camp. I just think when you look at, those two spots, the cornerback spot, if Byron Jones is not going to be back for the opener, there is an issue there. Obviously, Van Ginkel possibly not being back for the opener, but it looks like they can fill that spot. But the offensive tackle, they're going to need a swing tackle who can play. I love the free agent pickup, but we know he gets hurt.
Right.
And so they have to have somebody who can shift between the left and right tackle spots, and especially with Austin Jackson's potential inconsistency. So that would be my thing tonight is, can they find a corner or an offensive tackle that you feel reasonably good about going into the season?
Yeah, and we're going to get into all that stuff here today, right? We're really going to unpack what we're expecting from these roster battles. My co-host is Michael Quirk. You see him, he's around here somewhere. There he is. Michael, what are your feelings about what we're going to see here this evening?
Yeah, I have to echo a lot of what Ethan said in that you have to make sure that guys don't get hurt. You see, you get a corner in for a cup of coffee and done for the year. And so that'll be really interesting to see. And you really want someone to emerge in that cornerback battle, or you have to go outside shopping yet again.
Right.
I'm really interested to see what sort of the wide receiver rotation looks like right now, because while there's some positions where, like along the offensive line, like at corner and so forth, where you need to find some more depth, that's somewhere where you have a lot of capable guys. And it's going to be interested to see. You're going to have to get rid of someone who could potentially help you, which I suppose is a good problem to have. So I'm interested to see who they throw out there and what that sort of rotation looks like, and if anyone can make one lasting impression before we get to cut down day.
Absolutely. I want to actually piggyback on something that you just said. I want to show this quote. This is from Mike McDaniel earlier this week. He said, "There are some jobs to be settled, and it's not as easy as who has the most tackles, who has the most yards. I look at it like this. Each position is coached by a position coach that is accumulating points of emphasis during the course from May on, and you see how people adjust. The longer that you get into camp, the more specific those things get. In that process, you're seeing how people respond, and by nature, especially with a competitive roster, we have more NFL players than spots." I think that's what you were talking about, Michael. Hussam, you've done some deep dives recently with your work. You're kind of breaking things down on Twitter. If you guys aren't following Hussam Patel on Twitter, you're missing out on great Dolphins content. What do you make of what Coach McDaniel said there about sort of the roster crunch that they're facing?
I think you have a lot of players who may be on the bubble that made the roster last year and who were confirmed starters, kind of like a Myles Gaskin and Savon Ahmed. One of my friends from the ATB network, Bradley Davis, shout out to him. Chase Edmonds, he's a lock. Okay. Raheem Mostert, he's a lock. Alec Ingold, the fullback, he's a lock. When I'm looking at the running back situation, I look at the scheme itself and what San Francisco and Green Bay does with their running backs. They keep a rotation. I have at least 3 and 4 running backs. Now, does that mean they keep Myles Gaskin? Do they keep Savon Ahmed? Who fits the scheme a little bit more? I tend to lean towards Savon Ahmed just because of his speed, and he's played under Mike McDaniel before. So there's a little bit of familiarity on that. I think the big question is Mike Gesicki playing today?
That is a good question.
I know there's been a big point of emphasis on Gesicki this season. Is he able to block properly? Is he being used properly? I think just because of what Hunter Long and Durham Smythe bring, to the table in terms of their skill set, I think they're locks as well. And I think the big question is, and David, if you don't mind me just sharing my screen right here, but Tua is practicing today. A good friend of mine, Josh Moser, just you can see him right there. He's practicing for a preseason game right now, 2.5 hours before the game even starts. Is this a hint that Tua will start? Is this a hint he's just going through the motions? We don't know yet, but, I share the same concern as Ethan. I also share the same concern as you, Michael. I don't really want any of my starters playing for the final preseason game, but maybe Mike McDaniel has other thoughts.
Absolutely. And he's got to get his reps in too as the coach and as a play caller on the sideline. So it'll be interesting to see how much run those guys get. Lewis, I want to go to you here. You're, again, the host of Pulse of Fins Nation here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. You're really tapping into what's, how Dolphins fans are feeling. You had an episode this week with Ron, your co-host. What's going on with Dolphins Nation moving into this preseason finale?
Well, if there's one thing that can definitely be figured out, is that the offensive line is the number one concern for Miami Dolphins fans, and it's not even close. Anything else, like cornerbacks, don't care. Linebackers, don't care. All they're really worried about right now, every single comment that was made had something to do with that offensive line. And while my co-hosts Ron and Manny, our producer for the show, he also chimed in and said that we're overreacting to the whole situation. Me, personally, I tend to look at this a little more of a concern. Again, because I look at things I tend to look at things in a big picture view. I wish I was as good at film as Hussam was. I wish I had that kind of ability, but I tend to look at things more in the big picture, and I let guys like Hussam fill in the details and add in like the shading and stuff if we were talking in artist terms. So the situation right now is that we have Teron Armstead, and I keep telling Ron, don't put that evil on me when he says when Teron Armstead gets hurt. And I say, no, he's going to be fine. Don't worry. But there's always going to be that lingering thought in the back of my brain that says, what happens if Teron Armstead goes down? Are we really going to rely on Greg Little to be holding down the fort for that length of time? And if we are, then I hope that the team is very confident in his abilities, because we haven't gotten to see much of him at all. And if not, then who are the Dolphins going to pick up? I know that Chris Kaufman of the 3 yards per carry threw out the idea that some of these San Francisco 49er offensive linemen, they're going to shake loose, and McDaniel's going to be like, hey, I recognize you. Come here. You're going to come play for me now, which I'd be fine with. Would be perfectly honest with you. It's going to be the same blocking scheme. It's going to be the same idea. So it's more of a plug and play if they have any kind of ability at all. So, but with that in mind, so now you have Armstead, and then if he goes down, are you going to move Austin Jackson to left tackle? Are you going to make Greg Little be the left tackle? Are you going to move Liam Eichenberg from left guard to left tackle? And if you're going to do that, then who's going to play left guard then? Are you going to make it Solomon Kinley? Is it going to be a Robert Jones? Is it going to be, and by the way, not to mention, then right tackle. If you move Austin Jackson to left tackle, who's playing right tackle? Is it Eichenberg? The flux of the offensive line as it is, the only thing that we know for sure is that when healthy, Armstead is left tackle, Connor Williams is going to be the center, and your right guard is Robert Hunt. Any one of those guys gets hurt, and suddenly everything gets thrown off. And so that's the concern that the Miami Dolphins fans have, is that these guys have to stay healthy. And if they don't, it's a very huge question mark on just how effective that offensive line is going to be throughout the season. And as we all know, as Dolphins fans, for the past 10 years or so, a season can be made or broken by how well your offensive line can play. Ask Ryan Tannehill how many times he could have made the playoffs if his guards could guard him for more than 2 seconds.
Yeah, you make a great point, and you touched on CK's tweet, and we've got it up on the screen here for you. CK was referencing the amount of tackles that they have over there in San Francisco, including guys like Jalen Moore, Colton McKivitz, and Justin Schooley, maybe? I'm not sure. They've got those guys behind Trent Williams and Mike McGlinchey. Somebody might shake free in San Francisco, and as you said, that familiarity with McDaniel and the offense might make it an easy seam fit. You also mentioned Greg Little. We haven't seen Greg Little yet this preseason. He's been hurt, I guess, or held out one way or the other. There's been a ton of Larnell Coleman and Keon Smith, and while they might have had moments overall just relatively unimpressive all the way through. Ethan, we're again talking a lot about the offensive line here. Is there something that you're hoping to see from the offensive line, or is there something that that you think the Dolphins can do with this sort of aspect of the roster where it's kind of up in the air at this point?
Well, I think the starters are fairly clear at this point, but to me, it's just, can they get any push? I mean, I just want to see them get push, and because I do think that McDaniel, once the season starts, is going to be able to scheme some things for them. Whether it's their blocking schemes or whether it's just Tua getting rid of the ball quicker, which it's hard to get rid of the ball any quicker than he did last year. But I feel like that he'll find other ways with crossing routes and slants to be able to do that. But I want to see, what I want to see is if they're lined up, okay, first and goal from the 3, can they actually punch the thing in? Because that's where I'm coming down. Like, I feel like in pass protection, they're going to be able to figure things out, but are they going to be able to run the ball at all to set up the pass? Or are we essentially looking at a season where it's just going to be using the running backs as extra receivers? And if they don't have an offensive line that can get any push, then that's going to be the issue there. We've heard all offseason about how better coaching would bring more out of these guys. Okay, I think Robert Hunt's already a good player, but in particular Austin Jackson, maybe Eichenberg. Well, we need to see it. But also the depth is a concern. And you can criticize to a certain degree as the season starts, not getting another veteran tackle somewhere. Yeah. And I think that's a reasonable thing to ask, because, this has been a team that's gone young. They've added a couple veterans in a couple of different places, but not there necessarily beyond, obviously, the one big signing. And so particularly backups. So that's what I want to see is, can they get any push? You're going to have to run the ball in certain spots, okay? And maybe it's not going to be the core feature of your offense. Maybe you're not going to be top 10 like people hoped when McDaniel came. but you need to do it sometimes. And obviously they've got quickness. They got a variety of different guys in the backfield. They got a lot of things they can scheme up, but I just want to see, can they get pushed? That's my big thing, to watch tonight. And those kind of swing tackles are hard to find. I mean, the Dolphins for years have struggled to find those guys. I remember Spencer Falau going way back. Everybody was happy that he was competent for a couple of weeks. It's just, finding a guy who's not good enough to be a starter, but is good enough to fill in a couple of spots. It's not easy. And I get it, but you got to keep throwing people at it until you can find it, because your offensive tackles are not going to stay healthy for 17 games. It's just not going to happen.
Right. And you bring up a great point about the short yardage stuff. And Hussam and Michael, you guys were talking a little earlier about offensive line and specifically the running backs. And I'll go to you guys for this one. The Dolphins have only gained 86 rushing yards so far this preseason. I mean, we haven't seen the offensive line as we're expecting it to look moving into the regular season. Obviously, we haven't seen guys like Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, which should have an effect on opposing defenses. Right. But when Ethan talks about short yardage stuff, we've seen Sony Michel be really ineffective. Do the Dolphins have a short yardage back on this roster?
Michael, I'll let you take this question.
Yeah, it's tough. That's something that the Dolphins have been wanting for a while. And then, of course, we've seen that running back room is filled with a lot of speed. But, of course, there's a legitimate fullback on the roster now. And I'm excited to see what they can do once Waddle and once Hill are playing and how that's going to affect the running game, because McDaniel has talked ad nauseum about how he wants to make the field as wide as possible, make these guys cover as much ground as possible, which not only is going to help you in the short term of the game of having extra space, but you're also going to wear down a defense that way. And once you get toward the second half, third quarter, fourth quarter, be able to take advantage of a bit of a gas defense. So there's not that big bruising back that you think about from days gone by, but you're hoping that they can scheme for it. You're hoping that getting some extra blocking can help. And one thing that I do know is you can't have Mike Gesicki in there when you're trying to get a short yardage.
Yeah, he's really struggled. I mean, that safety last week, it was an indictment, obviously on Teddy Bridgewater too, but his Gesicki's blocking has been suspect to say the least. Hussam, again, you dive into the X's and O's quite a bit. Is there anything that you've seen this preseason that makes you sort of dismiss the Dolphins' ineffective running game so far?
To be frank, and I'm going to be really, really, really honest here, I haven't watched much of the Dolphins preseason games because I really don't take notice into the X's and O's or who is going to be doing what into the regular season. Preseason games are for, the coaching staff and the team to find out, all right, who is going to be our depth guys there. And since we're on the topic of running backs and offensive line, for one, I think Chase Edmonds and Sony Michel are going to be our goal line back. Now, will Sony Michel stay on the roster? I don't know. Does he fit the scheme? Depends on how your offensive line works out as well. Now, mainly the offensive line we've seen has been the second and third team offensive line. So, of course, they're not going to be on the same talent level as the first team offensive line of a Teron Armstead, of a Connor Williams, of a Robert Hunt. It's all about depth. And when I look at some of these plays, when I'm looking at the film, it's all very basic stuff that, the second and third team guys, they look like they're executing them well against the same talent level. But when, you want the first team to look like that, which everybody is like, they have their eyes glued to Skylar Thompson. I mean, he's doing basic offensive plays that any quarterback in the NFL should be able to do. It's depth. All it is depth and basic plays. Now on this offensive line, you have Robert Jones who, helped the Dolphins beat the Patriots and, helped Duke Johnson deliver a 100-yard day against the Patriots on the season finale last year. You have Solomon Kinley, who was in the doghouse last season. He's improved from what I hear from reports from, Alpha and U in camp. You also have Kellen Deesh, who CK, Simon, and Alpha they've also raved about his run blocking ability. And looking at his days from Arizona State, he's done very, very well as a left tackle, just run blocking. I know I put up CK's tweet on there regarding, those three offensive linemen, but San Francisco's offensive line is also struggling. Nobody has paid attention to that. Their left guard, Aaron Banks, a second rounder from 2021, he's about to be beat out by an undrafted free agent offensive lineman. He might get cut. He's had a bad preseason. Their center, he's a 30-year-old with 16 career NFL starts. This is their first-team center. Their first-team right guard, he's a day 3 rookie, unchallenged, and he's already pegged in as the starter. Their right tackle, he can't even anchor properly, can't even set his feet. Before he had a torn quad and a knee injury. So the 49ers also have questions on the offensive line. And whether these guys will be on the waivers per CK's tweet, I'm not even confident about. Another team which is struggling along its own line is the New England Patriots. A lot of these good teams that we've seen make the playoffs, they're also struggling with their offensive line. The Dolphins aren't the only ones struggling with this in camp and preseason. Other teams are. And it's going to come down to the regular season to see how this offensive line gels together, how they mesh. And the best thing for an offensive line is to play continuously. They gain chemistry together. They tried that last season. Ultimately, they didn't have the talent to do it. This year looks like they have the talent to do it with Teron Armstead, with Connor Williams, with Robert Hunt, with Leo Meikenberg as a second-round pick, with Austin Jackson as a first-round pick. These guys were drafted with talent to be a good offensive line, and they were, signed in free agency to be a good offensive line. Give them a couple of weeks in the regular season and see how they do.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and definitely how they fill out the roster. Lewis, you and I have talked quite a bit about the offensive line and the running backs as well. Let's shift over now and talk a little bit about what's going on with this roster bubble, but we'll use what Hussam was saying as kind of the piggyback here, the transition. Let's look at the running backs first. We're assuming Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert, obviously on the roster, no questions whatsoever. But beyond that, guys like Savon Ahmed, Jared Dokes, Sony Michel, Myles Gaskin, and Zaquandre White, they're all sort of vying for a spot. So, Lewis, I got kind of two questions for you. One, how many running backs do you think the Dolphins are going to keep? And two, of that list that I just mentioned, who would you keep?
All right, so this for me, I've thought about it and I've considered what is more important to this team. And the more I think about it, the more that I just kind of try to go based on what my eyes are looking at. And quite frankly, based on what I've seen from Sony Michel, I'm over Sony Michel already. I don't like it. He doesn't do anything for me. He's not anything particularly special. There's probably a reason the Patriots let him go so easily. And so I'm over him. I think he doesn't make it, and I have no desire to bring him back at this point. If we need a power rusher, I'm going with Zaquandre White. And if anybody has noticed that it's so easy to say Zaquandre Wright, even though that's not his name. So you have to stop yourself. Otherwise, you're going to end up saying it. That being said, I think they're going to keep 3 running backs. I don't count Alec Ingold as a running back in this case. He's a fullback. He's a completely different thing.
Right.
So with that in mind, the third running back, if it's me at this point, it's still Savon Ahmed. Because if nothing else, Savon Ahmed can take one cut and he can make a home run if he wants to, because he has enough speed to do it. He can definitely catch the football. We know that he's done that last season even. So he's a perfect fit for the kind of idea for what Mike McDaniel wants for his team. As for guys like Myles Gaskin, I mean, once again, this boils down to the limitations. Gaskin does not look particularly fast when he runs. He doesn't do anything special. He's a guy. He's a guy that if push came to shove and you just needed to throw somebody back there, he can definitely get the job done. But between the two of them, Savon Ahmed and Myles Gaskin, Ahmed just looks more impressive, and that's the guy I'm going with. Sony Michel, not interested. Jared Dokes, he was a draft pick. He may end up on the practice squad to try again. Zaquandre White, I think he will also immediately get put on the practice squad. He should. He honestly, let me put it this way. If Zaquandre White puts together a spectacular performance tonight against the Eagles,
Yep.
I would be very tempted to just say you're running back number 3 and Savon Ahmed can go onto the practice squad as well. Because now, as Chris Kaufman of 3 Yards Per Carry mentioned on their recent podcast, the practice squad rules have changed drastically in the past few years. I guess that's one thing that we can thank COVID-19 for. Is the only thing maybe is that now we have guys who with an unlimited amount of accrued seasons can now be stashed onto the practice squad if teams decide that they want to hang on to them. And not only that, they can even dress and play without even having to be elevated to the 53-man roster. It's almost like having a minor leagues on your team, which I guess that's one step closer to getting to that point, which I think the NFL needs to do. You need to give players an avenue to show themselves so that teams can look at it. But that being said, if I'm the Dolphins, if Zaquandre White puts together a fantastic game tonight, I'm going to go ahead and make him running back 3. But as of right this second, is still Savon Ahmed for me. That can change depending on what we see tonight. And
Right.
I'm sure Manny is going to be watching his Eagles very closely. So we'll have lots to talk about on this next episode of Pulse and Fins Nation. But I think for right now, it's Savon Ahmed. Depending on how Zaquandre White performs tonight, it might change.
Yeah, so just want to talk through those practice squad rules here for a second. Rosters can carry 16 guys on the practice squad now. 6 of those guys, as Lewis mentioned, can be veterans with an unlimited amount of time in the league.
You can have a 40-year-old veteran on your practice squad now.
Right, and then the other 10, they can have no more than 2 seasons. Teams are allowed to protect 4 guys on the practice squad from week to week. So if White does end up on the practice squad, they want to protect him, keep him with the team, they might be able to do that. And then, as you mentioned, players can be activated 3 times this season without being added to the 50-man roster or 53-man roster. Sorry, that's one more than what it had been previously. So we're still talking about these roster battles. And Michael, I want to go to you on this one. Let's talk a little bit about the wide receivers. We're assuming Tyreek Hill, obviously Jalen Waddle, Cedric Wilson Jr., and at this point, probably Eric Ezukanma and maybe even Trent Sherfield, right? So it looks like most of those spots have been locked up. So I'm going to go with that 2-question approach again to you, Michael. Number 1, how many wide receivers do you think they keep? And number 2, which of these other guys do you think they keep?
I think it's hard to nail down a number at this point because there's so many different things in flux in terms of how many quarterbacks are you going to roster, what is thing going to move quickly and manifest itself with Mike Gesicki, what's going to happen with that running back room, are there enough guys that you feel like you have to keep, and so forth. And I do think an extra spot could go to the wide receivers because they do have guys like Ethan Bowden, they do have Braylon Sanders, who hasn't looked great in the 2 preseason games, but has shown a lot during practice and so forth. You have Mohamed Sanu there. You have River Cracroft. You have a lot of different guys battling it out. That it's going to be fascinating to see who gets that last spot. I think Trent Sherfield, just because of how he was brought on and because of his familiarity with the offense and so forth, I do think he finds a way there. But also, you can't really rule out Mohamed Sanu, given his experience. And he looked like he started picking up some things pretty quickly there. And you've seen what he's able to do.
And if I might interject, there are several reports that Mohamed Sanu is basically leading team meetings in the wide receiver room at this point.
Mm-hmm. But let me ask you guys something about that, though. I mean, if you're looking at 5 receivers or even 6 receivers, don't to be able to be active on game day. Don't 7, but don't you need? I mean, you need a special teams contribution there. Like what is the new special teams contribution going to be? That would be my question.
I think Bowden could probably fill in as a return guy, particularly as a punt return guy. So that would be some of it. But you're right. Some of these guys, the guys on the fringes of the roster, they're going to have to contribute on special teams. Absolutely. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, to me, that's why this Gesicki conversation is so interesting also, because he's not a special teams contributor. He was one of your top 2 receivers last year.
Yeah.
So it just, everywhere you kind of look on this roster, you're like, okay, I can see where the potential of Mike Gesicki would be and how much value he could have for them. as another receiving threat. But if you're counting him as a tight end, he's not really a tight end now. I mean, they're trying to teach him some of these concepts. It's not going well. And then at the receiver position, they're kind of loaded with all of that. And he's not a special teams contributor. I just think everywhere you look on this team, it just screams trade to me. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's just that's kind of where it's at. And to me, he's the story tonight. Like, he's active, right? We assume he's going to play.
I would imagine. I mean, he played
Where?
into the third quarter. He played into the third quarter last week. I'd be surprised if they sat him, But, with some of that stuff, teams might end up calling the Dolphins bluff at this point with guys like Preston Williams, who, we're assuming he's not going to make the roster. But, he probably had trade value at one point. But do teams just wait around? I mean, everybody can see the state of the roster at this point, right? So teams know that the Dolphins can't carry 10 wide receivers.
Well, David, that's the same point you were making about the San Francisco offensive line, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not trading a pick for anybody on the San Francisco offensive line at this point because you're just waiting for somebody to get cut. I mean, in that case, you have the familiarity with McDaniel where they're probably going to want to play for him again.
Yeah.
So you have an advantage. But I just think generally, like, the idea that they were going to get a 5th-round pick or something for Preston Williams was ludicrous to me. When you looked at the roster and how many receivers you had, and that he probably wasn't going to make it unless he had a great camp, and then he bitched about it at the first week.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I mean, if you like there are a million Preston Williamses out there. I know he's got talent, but he's never healthy. So I think the odds of trades are small, again, unless it's Gesicki. I mean, that would be the only thing. And now that Roquan Smith is back in camp, unhappy or not, it's a weird spot that they're in there. They're going to have to cut a player they don't want to cut, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think Coach McDaniel intimated as much this week. And then obviously, they're going to have some tough decisions to make between now and Tuesday at 4 p.m. Before we shift over to the defense to talk through those guys really quickly, Hussam, you were holding up the number 7 in terms of wide receivers. Do you really think they can carry 7?
I think they're going to carry 7 at the start of the season, and week-to-week matchups are going to differ. Sometimes they're going to carry 6 receivers, sometimes they're going to carry 7 receivers. When I took a look at what San Francisco ran and what Atlanta ran with McDaniel as one of their offensive assistants, they ran a lot of 21, 12, and 11 personnel. Now, Miami last season didn't run a lot of 11 personnel. Basically, that's 3 wide receivers on the field. But it gets a little bit technical because Mike Gesicki was on the field. Do you count him as a tight end? Do you count him as a wide receiver?
Well, Gesicki said he was a wide receiver. So
again, it really depends. But when you look at, the injury history with Cedric Wilson, Jalen Waddle, he's been held out of practice a couple times. Do you really want to run the risk of having 4 healthy receivers and Tyreek Hill, Lynn Bowden Jr. was on IR last year. He's had injury history. Is he up to speed with the playbook? Like, you need depth at the wide receiver position, whether it be 6 wide receivers or 7 wide receivers plus Mike Gesicki on the roster. The NFL is a passing league. You need pass catchers. Sure, I mean, you can get by with 5 receivers, but if one of them goes down and, you're playing against, a New England defense who has rookie corners and old corners that can't keep up with, speedy, shifty guys, suddenly you have River Crackraft, you have Trent Sherfield, you have Braylon Sanders as well as depth, who you can pick off from the practice squad as well, and you can insert them in as well. And as Lewis and you brought up, David, the practice squad is there to fill these positions up with these kind of guys as well. If you don't want to put them on the roster for the game day, you can designate them to the practice squad, or you only need 48 active players to dress, I believe, or 50 active players to dress. 3 or 4 or 5 of them, they're just not playing for that day. You need to build your depth. And especially, Dolphins fans, and I'm pretty sure even McDaniel and the Dolphins have themselves, they have expectations for the playoffs. And in order to get to the playoffs, you need to have depth. And Ethan, you talk about it with the Heat all the time. You need depth on your bench. Well, the Dolphins desperately need depth on the pass catcher unit, on the defensive back unit, on the offensive line unit as well, if they really do want to make a push for the playoffs this season.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up great points, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see how they sort of massage this roster here going into Tuesday's cut day. Let's switch over to the defense here real quick before we do our prize pick spotlight. Lewis, I want to go to you on this one. Along the defensive line, there a lot of those guys. Well, really on the defense as a whole, a lot of these guys are coming back. A lot of the players from last season are going to be contributors again this season. But there are some questions moving into this preseason finale. Along the defensive line, do you see any of these guys making it? Ben Stille, Benito Jones, or Niles Scott? Any interior defensive line guys?
Ben Stille for sure. He's probably actually at this point, I think I agree with the guys like on the 3 yards per carry. I think Ben Stille has proven that he's worth being put into the rotation. As far as after that, you have Raekwon Davis, John Jenkins probably will make it. He's a leader in that defensive line room. Zach Sealer, Christian Wilkins, that would probably round it out. And to give credit because wait, did I not even see Zach? Did I not say Zach Sealer? Is he not on this list?
Oh no, I'm assuming Sealer is on there. Yeah.
I don't remember if I mentioned him. So yeah, Wilkins, Sealer, John Jenkins, Raekwon Davis, and Ben Stille. That's going to be your defensive line rotation, unless you want to throw in Ogba there and you don't want to classify him as an outside linebacker at this point. I guess you could say, he's still a defensive end, but that's fine. So either way, that's still 6 guys on the defensive line. That's more than enough. But give credit to Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel for finding yet another defensive line acorn, because it's like finding guys like Zach Sealer, who is a superstar in the making, and Ben Stille. If he even halfway measures up to Zach Sealer at this point, he's going to be a solid rotational player. Let me tell you something. Miami has a knack for finding these guys. So
absolutely,
if only they could have as much luck at cornerback.
Yeah,
maybe they do. Maybe they did. Maybe they Keon Crossan and Cater Cole who have that it factor. Who else?
Yeah, we just got the inactive list to come through.
Oh yeah, okay.
So
who do we got?
Chase Edmonds, Jalen Waddle, Xavier Howard, Crossan, Ingold, Armstead, Scarlett, Munson, Connor, Van Ginkel.
So who's playing?
Okay, couple interesting. No Ingold. I thought he was going to make the plays.
Okay, yeah. Well, Tyreek was a last-minute scratch, so I'm not convinced at this point that Tyreek's going to play.
True. Yeah, but as Brennan Scarlett, hold on, Lewis. Just to wrap up the defensive line one real quick before we switch over to linebackers. And Michael, I want to ask you about Brennan Scarlett specifically. Lewis, Porter Gustin, probably an outside linebacker, maybe listed as a defensive end. Would you keep him as an edge rusher at this point?
If he does really well tonight, I could make a case for him. But I think at this point they're looking for a veteran leadership, and Scarlett provides that more than Porter Gustin. And Porter Gustin probably could make the practice squad. He hasn't been hyped up quite as much as the likes of Skylar Thompson at this point. So while he's made plays, so has Benito Jones. So I don't think any team is going to clamor to be claiming Benito Jones for their roster. So if Porter Gustin can kind of stay under the radar, I think they could easily get him onto the practice squad, and then they can protect him. So if anything happens, but at this point, the fact that Brennan Scarlett and Calvin Munson are not playing and they're inactive, I think that kind of indicates that they'd be locked to the roster, because if they were still fighting for a roster spot, they would be active tonight to prove that they still got it. Unless they're saying that, well, they could still lose the job, but it's going to take a Herculean effort by the guys actually playing tonight.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, you brought up Scarlett. We haven't seen Scarlett in 2 weeks. We're not going to see him again here tonight. But they've got a ton of linebackers here. I mean, Gustin might be listed as a linebacker, defensive end. That's kind of up in the air. But Cameron Good, Calvin Munson, Sam Iguabin, Channing Tindall, Duke Riley, Darius Hodge. Some of those guys are going to make it, and some of those guys aren't. What do you think is going to happen with that linebacker battle?
Well, if we're going,
you went to the mute. Mike, you muted yourself.
I wonder if he's not even aware of it.
Yeah,
so we, okay. Goodbye, Michael.
Oh,
You're the producer, man. You got to remove him. Like, it's funny to watch him talk, but I don't know. I can't read lips.
Yeah. Oh,
was I on mute that entire time?
We tried to tell you.
Yeah, we tried.
Did you mute us? Did you mute us? Like, you tuned us out completely. We're trying to tell you. You're muted, bro. Stop.
Yeah, Nikki tried to tell us too, but she said that you look so happy though, so it's okay.
You were into it. Like, I wish I could have heard
Everybody's
what you were saying.
Yeah.
Are you gonna? What were you saying? Can't hear
No?
us.
All
Okay.
right. Okay.
We gotta wrap up anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, just real quick before we shift over to the prize picks stuff.
Oh yeah, I haven't made my point. I haven't made my picks. I'm gonna let you. Okay, I'm gonna put my fate in your hands tonight, David.
Oh boy.
You go
All
ahead.
right,
You make my picks for me. Here I come.
Hold on. Before we get there, just to wrap up, because we kind of went through all the position groups and stuff like that. I mean, in the secondary, does Noah Igbenogany make this team, Lewis?
No.
No.
Well,
What about
he
Kader
will. No, I take
Yeah.
it back. He will make the team, but I don't think he should. He doesn't deserve it, and I don't want him around. But he will make the team.
Yeah. What about Kader Kohu?
He does deserve it.
Yeah.
I hope he makes it.
And safeties, you think both Elijah Campbell and Verone McKinley?
They're going to choose between the two of them. I'm hoping
Yeah.
it's going to be McKinley, if only because he and Javon Holland have a rapport, and that can mean a lot. They know how each other thinks.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're looking at those roster battles tonight. Obviously, we'll recap some of that stuff and what we think is going to happen during the post-game show. But let's wrap up here with our Prize Picks spotlight. Prize Picks is our sponsor for this show. So here's one that they've got for the wide receivers, and I'm only looking at Dolphins players at this point, right? But these are three of the options on Prize Picks. River Craycraft over under 1.5 receptions, Eric Ezukanma over under 3.5, and then Braylon Sanders over under 2. Lewis, do you have a strong feeling on any of these?
Well, I already told you that I'm letting you pick them for me because my luck has been terrible. But quite frankly, I think at this point, Eric Ezukanma has solidified his spot on the roster, and I don't think he should be playing that much. I think that if anybody, this should be the game where Mohamed Sanu, Braylon Sanders, Lynn Bowden Jr., Preston Williams, these guys are going to be targeted more. And I think they may pull Ezukanma early, if only because I don't need any more convincing on him. And quite frankly, I can't imagine Mike McDaniel does either. So maybe he might make 2-3 catches, but I think after that, they'll probably pull him because I don't think he's going to, if he makes it all the way into the fourth quarter, I don't know. I guess it's just because they want to see more. Maybe they're not convinced. I'm convinced. Quite frankly, I believe that he's good to go. Speaking of which, by the way, Nikki Cunningham is an Eagles fan asking for our advice on Dolphins sleepers for fantasy. So I'll let you. You're more of the expert on fantasy than I am, though. I'll let you look at it for there.
I mean, for a dynasty team, I mean, Ezukanma is probably a guy that you would look for to be a contributor down the line, in terms of like being a dynasty play, like diamond in the rough kind of situation. But beyond that, I mean, the guys that we're assuming will get the ball this season are probably the guys that don't get the ball, like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Wilson as the third receiver. That's part of the reason why when you look at this prop here, I would probably go under Ezukanma, the 3.5, because I'm kind of with you, Lewis, that he probably won't get a ton of run today. I would lean towards the over for Braylon Sanders. And River Craycraft, that's kind of up in the air. I probably wouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised if he got a little more run here today. So, 2 catches for Craycraft is definitely on the table. The other spotlight prop I got is for the running backs. They've got 2 of them here, Myles Gaskin and Savon Ahmed. These 2 guys are striving for that final running back spot on the roster.
And notice how Savon Ahmed has higher numbers than Gaskin.
Right. So, with Gaskin, the receiving and rushing yard combined over under 20.5. Fantasy score over under 3.8. And then for Ahmed, the yard combination at 26.5. And then his fantasy score of 4. This one's tricky. I actually think I would go over for Myles Gaskin on both of these because I would imagine that he's going to get some run here today. And then Ahmed, he's been good this preseason too. But Gaskin has got the most in terms of opportunity. So I would probably go under on Ahmed because he only has 20 rushing yards through the first 2 games. And then, he has, does he even have a catch? He's got 3 catches for -2 yards this preseason. So
you know what makes me nervous though, David?
What?
Is knowing that this is the main concern that was happening in the show when I did last week with Ron. And this is why he kind of like poo-pooed it and act like it's no big deal. The Dolphins ran less than 10 yards in an entire first half, these first 2 preseason games. 10 yards total.
Yeah.
Not one player, total. So it's very difficult for me to pick the over on running yards for anything at this point.
They did not have your boy Skylar Thompson on the board today.
Yeah, because they know it's like, oh God, Skylar Thompson.
Yeah,
he's gonna be. They can't pick it over because they were this close to losing on him last time.
That's right. But PrizePicks is our sponsor, so make sure that you head over to PrizePicks.com and you use the promo code 5FIVE when you sign up. If you're signing up with that promo code, they will double your initial deposit up to $100. All right, Lewis,
I got one last question for you, though. I got one last question for you, bro. Because the way the PrizePicks works, you do have to pick at least one player from one other team. So in order to make the prop, so let's who's a safe pick do you think tonight? Or we're looking at all the props on PrizePicks.
Okay, let me scroll through here quick. All right, so with some of the other ones, they've got our old friend Jacoby Brissett with 55.5 passing yards. If he's going to be the starter in Cleveland, he might not get a ton of runs. So I would maybe go under on Jacoby Brissett for those passing yards. They have Teddy Bridgewater at 85.5 passing yards. So
that's a Dolphin though. So that's a Dolphin. That's a Dolphin pick though. It needs to be other team.
Yeah. My bad.
I know he's still wearing the Broncos jersey in the picture.
Yeah, they do. They have to update. They have to update their setup here a little bit. I would consider the under on Jacoby Brissett over there for Cleveland, and then they've got Justin Fields at 10.5 rushing yards for Chicago. I mean, I can't imagine he's going to get a ton of time in Chicago. So they might not want him to run around. He might be in there for some pass reps only. So I would consider maybe the under on Justin Fields, although 10.5 is pretty low in terms of rushing yards.
Oh no, he can break 10 yards in a blink of an eye.
No, I know. I'm saying it's kind of a gamble on that one. But again, is he really going to play? So it'll be interesting. I mean, there's a ton of options here. Former Dolphin Philip Lindsay, 23.5 rushing yards for the Colts. That might be an over. So it's there's a few options floating around out there on PrizePicks for tonight. I'm looking at the receivers right now. Former Canes wideout Mike Harley's with the Cleveland Browns. They've got his over-under set at 38.5 receiving yards. So if you're a Canes fan, you could play that one. I would maybe consider the over on that one. But that's, again, kind of a stretch. We'll see.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and going to take a gamble on the under for Jacoby Brissett. And I'm trusting in the heart of the David right here. So you're the PrizePicks guy.
That's a ton of pressure, Lewis.
Yes, it is. Because you know what? I don't want the pressure on me this time. And it's done.
Yes.
PrizePicks has been entered.
Yes. So we'll be with you later this evening for the post-game show. Just some programming reminders here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. They've got the 5 on the Floor Heat show, goes daily on 5 Reasons. There's a weekly 6th Ring Cane show that talks all about the Miami Hurricanes. They are getting going soon. The Pulse of Vince Nation, Lewis's show, that runs on Tuesdays, right, Lewis?
That is correct. Tuesdays at 7 p.m.
Tuesdays at 7 p.m. So make sure you check in on that. And then obviously tonight, post game, we've got the Final Yard for you. We've got a couple other shows on deck as well. The Extra Yard, that one's with Alex Dono, and he will be joined by former Dolphin Troy Stradford as his
Little
co-host.
Troy.
That's right, as his co-host on Monday afternoons on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. And then Setting the Edge is a weekly college and pro football betting show hosted by Sean Rochester and Tony Schwartz. That one's sponsored by Better Edge. Hit up betteredge.com/5reasons for a free $20 play. That's another show that will come to you weekly on the channel. So, Lewis, do you want to venture a final score before we get out of here for tonight?
Final score, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep saying 20-10 until I end up being right. How about that? One of these days I'll get right.
20. And so, but who has the 20?
Well, just because it'll drive Manny crazy, I'll go ahead and say Miami wins.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go with the Dolphins here as well. And I'm going to say 24-21. That would hit the over in Vegas for tonight's line totally. So we'll see how it goes. Make sure you check in with us post game for the final yard. For Lewis, my name is David. Thanks for watching, everybody.